On YesToHellWith.com, Orlando Carter admitted, rather directly, that he never had a $4 million loan with PNC Bank. He stated unequivocally that he never stole $4 million from PNC. With this admission, how is it possible for Mr. Carter to be convicted and imprisoned for 15 years for something he did not do? Journey into the unbelievable. After you understand the facts, you will never bank with PNC again. SEDM.org, Sovereignty, Education, and Defense Ministry, is a website that every patriot in America must join. SEDM.org will change your life perspective and liberate you mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Visit SEDM.org today and join for free.
Welcome back to the Where Are the Heroes podcast. I am Bo Johnson, the author of The End of Justice. You may recall in our last episode, we reviewed 3 important ways the federal government could have confirmed Orlando Carter's innocence concerning alleged crimes relating to a $4 million obligation with PNC Bank. We then discussed how both PNC Bank and the federal government could have determined that it was impossible for Carter's companies to have had a financial obligation with PNC, given that an Ohio LLC or corporation must authorize such obligations with the issuance of corporate resolutions. As a standard practice, banks require corporate resolutions as evidence that officers or the board of directors consent to financial liabilities which bind a company. In essence, then, we have 2 absolute means of protecting innocent people from arbitrary or unjust charges by the federal government. The first layer involves competent criminal and prosecutorial probes of the motives, conduct, and accusations of the party making the allegations, especially since the investigators can seek the assistance of other agencies. As a practical matter, an allegation of a crime should be either refuted or confirmed with the resources available to the government. The next layer is through parameters that exist at the state level. For example, Ohio law governs the conduct of limited liability companies and corporations. Banks and governments must default to the laws of the jurisdiction in which an entity exists. Thus, an Ohio LLC or corporation would not be liable for a loan or loan guarantee unless the corporate officers chose to bind the company to such a financial commitment. Candidly, had the FBI and DOJ researched and applied such fundamentals to its investigations concerning Orlando Carter and his companies, the DOJ would not have charged him. This leads us to a rather significant question. Why was Orlando Carter charged and convicted? The answer may likely be found in the background noise of the story. This noise, those rumblings, rumors, false sentiment, enticing innuendo, gossip-like intrigue, the sensational that draws people and agents away from what is elementary and true, creates the confusion that leads agents and prosecutors into what is false. We are at an important juncture then. We must dive into that background noise. We must grapple with the confusion and discover why PNC Bank ever sent such a large amount of money to Carter's company. This background noise is what federal officials contended with for years. They had to size up a cast of witnesses. They had to determine motives. They had to question word use and understand definitions and place all the moving parts and actions into proper context. With all that is involved in a comprehensive and complex financial investigation, the likelihood of arriving at truth is remote if the agents entertain and misinterpret the background noise, especially when the training and motivations of the agents are suspect. Let's refer to the FBI agent who investigated PNC's false claims and Carter's company. His name is Kevin Gormley. Notably, when Gormley conducted his investigation, He apparently had no training in highly complex financial crimes. As such, he should not have been responsible for investigating an alleged financial crime that only competent agents would have understood. Then there are Gormley's personal motivations. Gormley is on the record questioning how Carter could become so successful in such a short period of time. Orlando Carter is a black man, yet Orlando's race has nothing to do with his success. Should a federal agent be permitted to investigate someone's innocence or guilt if that agent has a prejudice based upon race, gender, or creed? Is Gormley the kind of agent who seeks convictions at all costs? Does he use other suspects to seek accusations against even more important people? Is this what he was doing as he investigated Orlando Carter? We must conclude that not only is the background noise of a criminal case a significant factor, but the inability and unwillingness of an investigator to rightly divide the background noise while divorcing his ill-advised motives are essential. Let's refer to a couple of documents that will serve as validation of what Gormley did or did not accomplish during his investigation. These documents are known as 302 statements, summations of an FBI agent's interviews with witnesses. These specific 302s pertain to Ralph Martinez, a bank officer, and Sean McAllister, a bank employee. We must recall that Gormley did not adequately and competently investigate PNC's allegations, and he did not use other federal agencies or resources as he should have. Gormley either knew or should have known that Orlando Carter's companies were Ohio entities. As such, at the state level of jurisdiction, Gormley should have applied Ohio law to the investigation when and where appropriate. The standard would have been met that under Ohio law, an LLC or corporation cannot be obligated for a financial obligation unless corporate resolutions are signed for this specific purpose. Consequently, Gormley would and should have sought these resolutions and asked PNC if these documents were required in its transactions with Orlando Carter and his company. At a minimum, these documents would have been something Gormley or a competent agent would have needed to validate Carter's innocence or guilt. Since Orlando Carter did not authorize corporate resolutions for any financial obligation with PNC Bank, and these documents were not requested by PNC, we must conclude that Gormley did not investigate this angle. For, had he researched Ohio law, Gormley would not have sought additional questionable evidence to justify PNC's false allegations that were easily refuted under Ohio law. It will soon become apparent that any questionable evidence came from the background noise and the resulting confusion of this tragedy, which means the FBI investigation was neither comprehensive nor competent. Our review of these 302 statements is critical. We will focus on the following factors, which I've highlighted respectively: people in yellow, dates in the color violet, contradictory words in blue, documents green, and notable statements highlighted in gray. The 302s are primary means for the FBI to validate that crimes were committed. Although we only have 2 of these 302 statements available, they will serve our purpose. We should be able to conclude if Gormley conducted a reasonable investigation by scrutinizing the use of his words within the 302s. Before we review the 302 statements, let's underscore once again the basic components of this tragedy. PNC Bank alleged that Carter and his company had a $4 million obligation and stole the money. Carter and his company served as a vendor for PNC Bank. PNC's intentions were to finance a project for Butler County, Ohio. The FBI had 3 ways at the federal level to verify or disprove PNC's claims. And finally, the FBI had the opportunity to use Ohio law to confirm or deny the financial obligations of Carter and his company. I will return after this brief message.
Are you looking for a quality gift for that special someone? Visit jamesbowersjohnson.com and buy the classic to be, Why Does the Moon Chase the Sun? This book reveals the very first battle between good and evil. When you learn why the moon chases the sun, you will be saddened and inspired at the same time. Buy this ebook today and read it with your children and grandchildren. They will be spellbound. And don't forget, Yes to Hell With receives all proceeds. Thank you for your support. YesToHellWith.com, and may truth reign supreme.
Welcome back to episode 4 of Where Are the Heroes? The witnesses for these 302s are Ralph Martinez, Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the bank, and Sean McAllister, an employee recently hired to manage a division dealing with municipal leases. Since most people have never seen, much less read, an FBI 302 statement, these will provide great insight. Perhaps the most significant observation is that you will be able to assess an agent's competence and the FBI's commitment to objective analysis and investigations. Rather than provide my interpretation of the 302s, you would be best served by reading them and arriving at your own conclusions. If you consider that Orlando Carter was charged and convicted upon the premise that he or his company had some alleged $4 million obligation to PNC Bank, you may reach the obvious conclusion that even the most incompetent FBI agent would have determined this to be false based upon the comments and understandings made by Martinez and McAllister. I encourage you to review the items highlighted in blue and gray at a minimum. Notably, in the Martinez 302, the term lease was used at least 20 times, and guarantee and guarantor were used at least 3 times. The word pledge was used once. In the McAllister 302, lease and lessee were used 40 times, and the word loan was used 5 times. The word guarantee was used 3 times. Here are some questions and topics to keep in mind. What jurisdiction was involved, federal or state? What was Gormley thinking with each comment made by the witnesses? What evidence was Gormley weighing? Consider the number of strange interactions and relationships that adversely affected other participants. For example, Smith and his ability to sign for Butler County and Carter's company at the same time. This is all part of the background noise that unduly affected an FBI agent. Did PNC have quotas to provide loans to minorities? How much did the threat of another bank funding the project affect Martinez and Rinaldi? To what extent was Carter involved in the transaction and when? I encourage you to play the role of the detective and assess FBI agent Gormley's competence or incompetence. At the conclusion, we will have validated the failure of the FBI and specifically Agent Kevin Gormley to dignify the awesome responsibilities required when discerning the truth and a man's innocence or guilt. At the end of the year, when businesses finalize transactions, the CEO and CFO of National City Bank, which was acquired by PNC, rushed a decision concerning Butler County. We know that the parties to the lease were not in agreement. Butler County can be viewed as woefully incompetent and incoherent about the transaction. During conversations between bank officials and James Smith, PNC made mistakes in its transactions, just as the bank made mistakes with the first lease with Butler County. We know, for example, that bank officials made mistakes with their own internal documents and procedures. We have an internal email sent by the bank to other bank officials admitting to improprieties with the transaction, and that the local bank branch was not responsive to phone calls and requests from both Butler County and banking headquarters. This is a major revelation. It is transparent that not only did the bank rush its decision to fund the project during the second part of the transaction, but also that these mistakes were likely violating banking laws and regulations. Consequently, it appeared as though the bank intended to hide errors made in the first lease. The bank's problems with its own documents underscores the motivation of bank officials to avoid allegations of wrongdoing and perhaps possible fines by regulators. They chose to blame Orlando Carter. Perhaps in desperation, bank officials thought that submitting a suspicious activity report to the FBI would divert attention away from the bank's culpability. However, if the FBI agents had given PNC's claims and suspicious activity report the objective consideration they deserved, these agents would have investigated the bank records with great care and suspicion. Instead, the FBI treated Orlando as a two-bit thug, a bad actor, and the mastermind of a crime. Let's recall a simple but powerful point. If PNC officials believed Orlando was in any way obligated for a $4 million loan, they could have pursued a civil action in a court of law. However, they did not. It is likely that bank officials knew their internal documents were insufficient to prove that Orlando and his company were liable. Thus, making a false criminal claim deflected blame away from the bank, and it allowed for the write-off of the debt and avoided government scrutiny of their own irregularities. We know FBI agent Kevin Gormley was not qualified to investigate a complex financial criminal case. Notably, even without the appropriate training, he could have made the most elementary conclusion that a $4 million loan or loan obligation did not exist. Regrettably, he did not ask for a forensic financial audit with either PNC records and the relationship with PNC and Butler County, or with the records of Orlando Carter's company. What were Gormley's motivations? Personal glory? Another conviction? He is known to have stated during the investigation that Orlando Carter had to have done something wrong to be so successful. Gormley assessed Orlando as a minority and deemed him to be of the criminal class. This is validated by Gormley's racial prejudice that affected his professional judgment. We have covered a lot of territory in this episode. We have learned much about the criminal and legal systems in the United States. It is appalling to consider that officials at any level of government can and do prejudice cases with their own theories of the crime or prosecution. Their vested interests with these flawed theories undoubtedly advance the investigation along a path with even greater prejudice when even more agents and more important officials buy into the morphing of narratives. Not unlike a snowball rolling downhill, subsequent officials review the prior work and add more false information and flawed opinions. Obviously, such investigators and prosecutors are not coloring within the lines of a drawing. Rather, they are creating an entirely different picture on a blank sheet of paper. Regrettably, no one has the courage to correct what is obviously and inherently wrong. The bottom line is that each official's personal agendas and motivations represent an unhealthy perspective without due consideration of the law, facts, and truth.
In this episode, we discussed 302 statements used by the FBI as summations of interviews with witnesses. After a healthy reading of Kevin Gormley's summations with Martinez and McAllister, we cannot help but conclude that Gormley was an incompetent agent whose judgment was clouded by his own prejudice. In our next episode, I will share some pointed questions that Gormley should have asked during his investigation. Until then, may truth reign supreme.
When will God-fearing, truth-seeking, and freedom-loving Americans stand for justice? The answer is simple. When they listen to the Where Are the Heroes podcast series on YesToHellWith.com.